Well, hi everybody, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to tonight's Joe Chaffee Weather Show. A little bit of a late night show tonight. It's 10 o'clock Eastern Time. Excuse me. Um, Missed my live stream last night. I wasn't able to do it. I had my best friend had surgery last night, and I had to go take care of him. So appreciate some of you have sent me some very kind messages about it. Thank you so much. And everything is fine. Everything is good. So I'm trying to get back to some semblance of normalcy today. So let's get started. We have Subtropical Storm Melissa, which developed well, actually was in the process of developing last night, and the Hurricane Center, I guess, found itself behind the curve and had to went from a 20% probability of a subtropical storm developing at 8 o'clock this morning to a 60% probability in a special statement to 8:30 at 8:30 to naming the storm at 11 a.m. It really made no difference with regards to what's been going on in the coastal areas from Delaware up through Long Island. We've had moderate coastal flooding. In some places, it was borderline major in some localized places. And there's a high tide coming in right now. The North Shore of Long Island, where I live closer to, not much closer to, I actually live about halfway from both shores, but the North Shore uh, didn't get as much coastal flooding. And I was up at Port Jeff Harbor right at the high tide this morning when it came in at hit the high tide at 10:27 a.m. and the water was just up to about the top of the dock. It was maybe about 4 or 5 inches shy of coming over and spilling onto into the mainland. So fortunately, at least from the standpoint of the North Shore, it was not a huge problem. The South Shore, on the other hand, there was considerable flooding in many of the areas that normally get flooding in situations like this. They got flooding, and in some cases, the flooding was extensive. Also, on the New Jersey shore, there was moderate to pockets of major coastal flooding from this morning's high tide. We're going through another high tide cycle right now, and I think this should be the worst of it, as we'll start to see the tides uh, lower just a little bit tomorrow morning. Some places may actually see it lower more than just a little bit. But that should be that high tide tomorrow morning really should be the last one of this sequence that was problematic, and then weather conditions will start to improve. The Great Plains blizzard, the Northern Plains blizzard, is going to be in the process of winding down overnight as low pressure moves into southern Canada, north of Minnesota, and we're going to take a look at that. And of course, that is setting the ball rolling for getting Melissa out of the way and getting things moving again along the East Coast. So let's get going, and we'll start off tonight with the watches and warnings that are up in around the country, and there's still quite a few of those. Whoops, there we go. And sorry about that, just a little bit slow on the uptake doing a live stream at 10 o'clock. It's a low, the energy level's coming down just a little bit. So I guess you guys are hearing me a-okay uh, that are on. All right, so we'll get started here. All right, now I'm sorry about that, folks. I have to do a lot of key hitting here with my mouse, and it's not being cooperative. All right, so here's what it looks like tonight on the Weather Service watches and warnings map, and uh, we have offshore tropical storm warnings that are up east of New Jersey and Delaware, well out to the east with Melissa, and they do not extend into the coastal waters that are right along the immediate coast where we have gale warnings in effect. We're going to start to see again as Melissa begins to move away tomorrow. All of this should begin to subside. Look at that large area of freeze warnings that are up from Oklahoma and parts of Texas, all the way up through Kansas and Missouri, down up through Iowa and into Wisconsin. And of course, this is on the backside of the circulation of that storm. We still have blizzard warnings up for the eastern half of North Dakota and into parts of northwestern Minnesota, with winter storm warnings surrounding that, and an area of winter weather advisories that goes into northeastern South Dakota and that narrow area in western Minnesota. And out in the west, of course, the problems have been with regards to the wildfires and the Santa Ana winds that have been howling in California the last day or so. The red flag warnings are minimized at this point, and that is also a big positive as things should start to relax in terms of the overall pattern. Now, here's the North Dakota storm, by the way, from their from the Weather Service office at Grand Forks, where the forecast is for a total of 8 to 12. You can see the amounts into parts of Minnesota, Thief River Falls at 4 to 6, Detroit Lakes at 6 to 8. And then you've got this large area of 8 to 12 for Grand Forks, and 2 feet or more, Devil's Lake, North Dakota, 24 to 30 inches. I mean, these are just crazy numbers that you're seeing here in this early season major winter storm and blizzard that has taken place over in the Northern Plains. Now, here's a surface map as of 5 p.m. Let's see if we get the latest one up here. And we do have the latest one. So this is the 8 p.m. surface plot. You can see Melissa on the right. And this is another example of how you have to be so careful with regards to looking at these weather models and going off the wall with the most destructive printout from some of those models. In this case, it was the European model back days ago with 50-foot seas and 70-mile-an-hour winds on the coastline, and that obviously never materialized. And the reason why is where you see the analysis plot here for 8 o'clock this evening, the Melissa is to the east of 70 degrees west. It's at about 69 or so, and it was actually forecasted to do this counterclockwise loop that was going to take it back to as some of the models as far west as 72 or 72 and a half west. Now that would have made a huge difference in the outcome. It would have been far more destructive from the standpoint of coastal flooding, from the standpoint of wind, and also with regards to heavy rains. But because it never really got back west of 70, the impact, other than the coastal flooding, which has been moderate, we fared off far less. So the Sandy redo with this that was out there days and days ago never did materialize. And you have to remember that generational big storm events are that stand out and cause and havoc in areas stay in your memory. So there's a natural tendency to want to go compare everything to that. But when the meteorology is totally different, the comparison is not valid. And that was definitely the case with this. The meteorology was totally different and the comparisons were just not valid. In the meantime, you see the Great Plains low just wrapped up here, sitting up in northwestern Minnesota, very tight pressure gradient on the west side with 30 to 40 mile an hour winds and temperatures that are in the 20s across the Dakotas and some lower 30s as you head down further south into South Dakota and Nebraska. You're seeing temperatures in the 30s to around 40. So this storm is actually funneling down some very cold air for this time of year, and hence the freeze warnings. And you also have, this huge cold front, this occluded front, and then the cold front that extends all the way south into Mississippi and down into Louisiana, about to make its cross over to New Orleans. And one of the things, by the way, one of the big upsides with respect to Melissa is that it pulled down some cooler air and drier air with dew points in the low 50s, getting all the way down into southern Georgia, and that was a big plus. So additional relief from that long duration stretch of temperatures well up into the 90s to near 100 degrees every day. With that, we had that upper ridge a week ago. Of course, that's long gone now, and the Lorenzo changed the pattern. And for those of you who wanted the heat to go away, it certainly did. Now here's our satellite loop tonight, and it goes from the visible after sunset. You see the infrared, and when it's on the infrared, you can still see rather clearly the where the center is. Now, think back a couple of nights ago, and I wasn't able to go beyond last night, but if you had seen it, the satellite, at least early last night, you really could, it would be very hard to pick up the swirl. There was a low cloud circulation, but you still have some convection there right around the center, and there's a band up here to the north. So it still remains clearly a subtropical system here. And also, if you were on Wednesday night with the Joe Weather Show when Joe Rea was on, and he talked about the fact that there was all this dry air. We showed you the water vapor imagery, and you saw all that mid-level dry air that made its way up into southern New England, and that played such a big role in creating some pretty nice weather conditions yesterday away from the immediate coastline in fact, even into coastal New Jersey, it was pretty nice through yesterday and last night. And areas in the interior away from the coast enjoyed some rather nice weather the last couple of days. Upstate New York, almost all of Pennsylvania, and then of course down into Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina and beyond. And you can see the clouds out to the west in the Ohio Valley. Now that's from the cold front that is swinging eastward. There's another band of on the water vapor imagery. The circulation still very clear here on the water vapor loop, but you also see the drier air that's to the west over the Hudson Valley down to Long Island and through New Jersey, and drier air also extending down off the mid-Atlantic coast. All of that being drawn down on the west side of the storm. Now, the moisture that's coming eastward with the cold front, the white area, that moisture is going to get into that dry air and gradually weaken. So this front coming eastward is probably not going to have much to it other than a wind shift and a few clouds once it reaches the East Coast, which it will do sometime Saturday night or early Sunday morning. That could be setting us up for a little bit of rain here Sunday night, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. Just to take a look at some of the observations right now here in my area, the winds, you've got some gusts into the mid and high 20s, but really nothing substantial. Most of the winds are still running from the northeast. Along the New Jersey shore, we've got northeast winds, and just inland, the winds have turned northerly. So even here, when you look at some of the gusts, you've got gusts mostly in the 20s. There are a couple of places where the gusts are coming up to about 30 miles an hour or so. This is as of 10 o'clock Eastern time, and I'm going to just kind of maneuver my way over into the area where we've got our snowstorm going on in the Northern Plains, and you see through Minnesota with these west winds and temperatures that are in the low 30s, and into North Dakota where we've got low 30s and 20s, and sustained winds. 23 gusting to 31. This is at Huron, South Dakota, and up through parts of North Dakota. Most of the sustained winds, a couple of places. Sand Lake is wind at 30 miles an hour, gusting to 41. The winds have actually come down just a little bit, but there's still going to be some pretty strong gusts in this area. I'm just going to throw the radar on really quick. Let's put the radar back on and see what we got in terms of precip. And that too, beginning to wind down. We've got a little bit of precip left, little snow left here in northeastern North Dakota, running near Watertown. That's where the back edge is, and on up through, this is Webster Municipal. So it's a narrow area of snow that remains in parts of northeastern North Dakota, and you've got some precip here going on. Light snow in at Litchfield in Minnesota. Trying to familiar myself. Howard Lake reporting just an observation there, but they're probably getting some snow, light snow at Maple Lake, Minnesota, and Sherburne, uh, 32 there. Yeah, winds are nothing especially crazy here that is going on as that storm is winding down. We still have coastal flood warnings, by the way. Just going back to Melissa, which we'll talk about what it's going to do for tomorrow. But we have coastal flood warnings up for Saturday morning for the South Shore of Long Island. Coastal flood advisories in other areas, and we have coastal flood warnings that are still up for the New Jersey shore. Also, the warnings are up through midnight. They may put them up again for tomorrow morning's high tide. Same for the South Shore of Long Island. But again, tomorrow morning's high tide, keep your fingers crossed. It should be lower than the one that we're experiencing right now. And then after that, things should improve. Although remember, there's a full moon on Sunday. So the tides are going to be running on the high side through the weekend and into early next week, even though the wind direction is not, and the storm Melissa is going to be out. So we're going to see our winds gradually turn away from being northeast or east northeast and go around to some sort of westerly component. Nothing on the radar in the Northeast except for a little bit of light precip in southeastern New England. That's really it. And with regards to some showers and some heavier downpours through parts of Michigan and Indiana, extending southward, you've got some heavier downpours and maybe a couple of thunderstorms there moving into parts of western Alabama. And what looks like at least one fairly strong thunderstorm cell that's near Baton Rouge. And of course, you've got your snow still up there in parts of in the northeastern part of North Dakota, and it's moving southward as it circulates around the low that is up in that area. So here's how it looks on the surface map, and then we're going to take a look at the upper air and speculate a little bit about the long range weather pattern. So right now, of course, we've got Melissa right here. You've got your trailing cold front that is moving through. I just drew it. It's a little bit too far to the west. And the gradient looks like it's relaxed a bit back through parts of California. High pressure is sitting up in eastern Idaho, and another high that is down in through Texas. So it looks like the Santa Ana is at least relaxing a little bit, although the wildfires in some areas in and around LA continue to go on, and they may go on for quite a while. So going forward, Melissa starts to move to the east tomorrow morning, and then it goes away. The high is gone, so winds are going to be backing around to the north. You see the cold front here that is making its approach. But look, the low center is so far to the west that there really is very little support with this front. So that's why there's not a whole lot of precip with it. And in fact, when it gets through here early Sunday morning, again, it'll just be a wind shift back over to the north. And then we wait. There's actually a second front. This front is going to stall out over the southeast. It's weak, but it is going to stall out, and that's going to produce an area of light rain through southeastern Virginia down into Georgia and parts of northeastern Alabama. The old plain storm is weakening here, and there's some colder, drier air that's coming down, or cooler, drier air that's coming down behind it. So you're going to get a little bit of wave action here. Meanwhile, it's nice and quiet through this whole area out from the plains on westward to the west coast. There's your wave for early Monday morning, a little weak low there on the southeast of Long Island, taking the rain out. So I think Columbus Day is going to shape up to be a pretty good day. I'm going to switch over just really quick here. Hang on one second. Let's switch to the radar echoes rather than the precip. So you can see by Monday morning, the rain is long gone. Here's what it looks like on the radar view of the GFS. So you got a little bit of rain with a couple of heavier showers there in parts of South Carolina. It gets enhanced a bit as it reaches the coast into southeastern Virginia. This is by 1 a.m. Monday. The rain is mostly offshore, so I don't even know how much of this we're going to actually see in my area, if any at all. Many areas may not see much of anything. and then out it goes, and we improve weather conditions for Monday into Tuesday. Monday, Columbus Day, should be a nice day. Getting there for tomorrow, probably some leftover clouds to chew through. And we'll have to see how successful we are in breaking through the cloud cover. I think that mid-level dry air that we saw in the water vapor imagery would be a positive development. Sorry, I left my phone there turned on, so it's making noises. And then as we head to Tuesday, that high moves off. Now, there is some cold air that is coming down from Canada into the Northern Plains. And there's another cold front here that is moving eastward. And we do have a little bit of a subtropical flow that's bringing some showers on Tuesday into Texas and into Louisiana and Arkansas and over into Mississippi. Now that front is going to be stronger when it moves toward the East Coast, because you do have some warmer air that's going to be trying to move northward, and you have some rather cold air that's coming down here into the Northern Plains with this 1024 high. So as a result, you'll start to see an expanding area of precip here, particularly in this southern branch, where the model is rather bullish, with developing some heavier rains across Alabama and Mississippi and over into Georgia. This is an area that's bone dry, so I'm sure they're going to welcome this rain. And then that front swings eastward on Wednesday. I think that there's a chance that this area here may be a bit underdone. You've got this cold front that's coming on through, and there's also probably some kind of a low and a wave that's going to be separate from that is moving northeastward. So between the two systems, most areas should get something. The front comes through. The model typically loves to rush it through here by early afternoon. It may be more like late afternoon or evening with some heavier showers. Might even be a thunderstorm or two in that mix there, up to parts of in that line that you see. Then this low is going to strengthen. The coastal low actually takes over and strengthens into a not half bad looking gale center approaching Nova Scotia here with some heavy rains Wednesday night and Thursday. But behind it, the gradient's going to tighten up, and we're going to have some rather chilly air coming down into the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states, and maybe even a little bit further south than that for Wednesday night, Thursday, and Thursday night. There's the next high that moves on out, and after that, we got yet another front that tries to make its way here through next weekend, although it doesn't hold together very well. You start to see, by the way, late next week, there's energy that comes into the Pacific Northwest, and that drops down into the Rockies. So there is some kind of a low that's going to try to develop here in the southern plains or central plains, and you do have rain, some heavier rains that are moving up into parts of the upper Mississippi Valley and into the northern plains, and some snow on the backside. This doesn't look at the moment to be like the last two systems were in terms of producing something major in terms of snowfall, and that's a good thing. Two early snowstorms in a row in the same place. It's hard to imagine that you could get three, but you see how I always say about how weather in a weather pattern, things do tend to rhyme if they don't repeat exactly. So there is a similarity, but there are some differences in terms of the upper air. So let's take a look at where we're going pattern-wise. Big upper low this evening, sitting up in northern Minnesota. You can see the reflection of, whoops, didn't want to do that. Hang on one second. Let's get this gone. Didn't need to pull up a sounding. Here's the system that represents Melissa. It's waiting for that kick from this system that is pushing to the east. It's finally going to get it. You know, it's really funny. The phone doesn't make a sound for hours, and then as soon as I'm on the air, messages start coming through. So anyway, here we go. The upper low starts to finally swing east and moves up into Canada. So that dries things out here in terms of the clouds anyway, as we move into early next week. But here comes the next short wave for the middle part of next week. This is a fairly strong short wave that is dropping down. There's a little bit of that southern energy that's there as well. That swings to the east coast and deepens. So here's our flow as we move into the latter part of next week. More energy coming in to the west, to the northwest, and up into southwestern Canada. That swings eastward as we go through next week. Now, here's where we start to see some rather interesting differences down the road. The GFS, and I don't know if I want to believe this necessarily, really wants to drop this trough pretty far down into the western part of the United States. So this is in the longer term. So if that is correct, it does temporarily pull up a ridge here in the east off the Florida coast. It's not like that big upper high that we saw back a week or so ago, but it's natural that when you get these systems that are moving along in a progressive pattern where everything's moving along from west to east, you're going to see ridges that are going to temporarily pop up. Now, where I think the model might be in error, and we'll have to wait and see, as I said, it really drops this energy down into the southwest, which forces this ridge to build up in the eastern part of the United States for a day or two or three, going into the 20th and 21st. And then that ridge gets flattened out as we start to see troughing come down into the northwest. But that's because of this thing. And I'm having my doubts about that. The European model is a little bit different, as it always likes to be in that time frame. So you can see the difference on the European. Here's the GFS. The European never really, it tries to build that ridge, but it's much flatter. It never really drops that trough down into the southwest like the GFS did. And if that's the case, you'll see a flatter flow here, a southwest flow. Yes, it will get warmer for a few days before the next cold front comes through, but ultimately the trough in the west does take over. I want to just go back one run on the GFS, because that sometimes when you go between the 12 and the 18Z, there are differences. But even on the 12Z GFS run, it really goes to town with dropping this cutoff down in the southwest. And I don't know if that's correct. And eventually, that just kind of gets separated there. And the northern part of the jet stream takes over and drops another trough in here in the longer term. I think the model is in error with that. We'll see if subsequent runs show that to be the case. We'll take a look at this, of course, over the weekend and come to terms with what we think will happen in the longer range. In the tropics, just want to mention a couple of things. You've got Melissa. There are two other areas in the 5-day outlook that the Hurricane Center is pointing out. One is an area down in the southwestern Caribbean right now. And the models have been forecasting low pressure or something coming out of this for the last 2 weeks or so. And as we've gotten into the shorter range, it's really lost a lot of what it was showing down in this area. It does show something, but it doesn't really ever get it going too much, mainly because it keeps most of the precip on land. The European actually wants to take it straight west from the southwest Caribbean over to the other side into the Pacific. But the Hurricane Center does mention that if this area stays over water, there's a slight chance that it could develop. And then there's a system, a wave coming off the African coast. Now we're at a time of year, and they mentioned this, that tropical storm formation in this area, because it's so late in the season, is climatologically unlikely. But some development is possible. Models are showing that that could happen. And you can actually see the wave just getting ready to come off from the African coast. But the way the upper air is at the moment, you're going to have a fairly deep trough out here in the eastern Atlantic. So if something does form out of this, what may wind up happening is you may wind up actually taking a surface low near the Cape Verde Islands and turning it very quickly to the north anyway. You'll notice that the clouds that are out in the tropical Atlantic are really not showing any kind of east to west push. The push at this time of year gets exceptionally weak, and that's why these systems don't ever really get going down there this time of year. And in the Caribbean, you can see this area here. And actually, if you notice, there's a little bit. If you look at how the clouds, there's actually a little bit of curvature in that. So there's a, I guess we could describe it as kind of a gyre that's sort of turning there, spitting off a disturbance. So this is where the system in the Caribbean might wind up seeing something coming out of that. But when we look at the GFS in the tropics on the surface map, it really doesn't do much with that. So I'm going to roll it back. There's a little low that pops up. In fact, on this particular run, it does what the European does with it, which is basically takes that little rotation. There's that little tiny low there to the east of God, I forgot what, if that's Honduras or not. I got to relearn my geography. And then the low moves off on the Pacific side, and maybe out of that you wind up with something that develops on the Pacific side. Then you get this thing where it tries to sneak it back over and push it up into the southwestern Gulf. Who knows? That's so far out into the long range. And again, when you look at the system way out in the tropical Atlantic, there's your low that comes off the African coast. So you're going to see it's going to turn. It turns northward almost right away, and actually on the GFS it passes east of the Cabo Verde Islands and then just disappears. So again, I'm not too concerned. By the way, you can also see how deep this low gets that heads up towards Nova Scotia. So we'll give a quick look for our friends in Canada. Let's bring up the Canadian map here. This is for Thursday. It's got a fairly wrapped up 978 low near Nova Scotia there by Thursday morning. So that would be gales and heavy rains that eventually spread up toward New Brunswick into Newfoundland and then on out to the northeast. Nice little storm there that develops for the Canadian maritime provinces. I guess with the strength of that upper trough, we probably should keep our eyes on that in case it winds up being something even more important. So, look, the bottom line is in the short range, the blizzard is winding down. We are, from the standpoint of major storms, we don't have too much to worry about. Melissa is going to get pushed away to the east-northeast and out to sea, and we could wave it goodbye. And that will be the end of that. So Nick Cortez hitting Super Chat tonight. And I thank you very much. And yes, snow is rare here on Long Island until early December. Last year being an exception, although November snows do pop up every once in a while. And that is a that is going to be dependent, of course, on the patterns that develop. Are we going to keep the trough in the east going to do? Are we going to keep the troughs in the east, bringing down colder air masses as we get into November? Or are we going to have an early season opportunity in the northeast? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how things evolve as we move forward. Okay, so yes, I will be, I actually only have 18 work days left, even though my last day on FiOS One News is going to be on November 15th. And yes, I will then, of course, as I have said, I will be full-time, my stuff, okay? So nothing changes for us. In fact, we are going to have more. So I will have time to do more instructional videos. I will have time to do, make sure we'll have my regular live streams, the weather in 5, and then of course for those that are on my Patreon platform, you're going to get more weather than you already get. So it's all good. This is a big positive for me. I'm really looking forward to developing my online presence on a 24/7 basis. It's kind of hard when you're doing that and working a full-time job at the same time. But now it's just going to be all online all the time. And I'm looking forward to growing all of this as yes, Robert Brown, yay for retirement. Absolutely. It's one thing when you work for, when you work for corporate entities all your life and now you're on your own. It's a little bit scary, but I'm ready, willing, and able. Hey, John Trabacchino is back. Nice to see you, John. Very mild up in Williamstown, Massachusetts. Only 53 degrees. Not bad. Still early in the game, way early in the game here in the month of October. And glad to see you back from your sabbatical. That is a definite good thing to see you back. Chris Alley, nice to see you on board. I saw you said you had water up to your lawn in Lindenhurst from the coastal flooding. It again, one more tomorrow morning's high tide with a little luck will be a little bit lower. If that storm starts to inch out to the east, that will certainly help. But tomorrow's morning's high tide, I would think would be no worse than the one you just had, and then it'll start to go down after that. But remember, folks, those of you who are on the coast, you do have a full moon on Sunday, so the tides are still going to be running high through the weekend into early next week. It's going to take a while for the waters to settle back to something resembling normal since they've been pushed to the shoreline for the last 2.5+ days. With the full moon, those tides are going to be running high. Javon Perry, no snow, no snow in October, less snow for the upcoming winter. Snow in October means less snow for the upcoming winter. Usually it can snow in November. Well, Javon, you make a point because if you look back, at least I know from the standpoint for New York City, for example, a lot of times in the years where you see a little bit of snow in October, even a trace, it's usually in an El Nino pattern. And then when you get into the winter months, the cold air goes away. So there might be some value to the idea that if it does snow early in the Northeast in October, it might be a sign that the winter upcoming won't be productive from the standpoint of snow. The Joe and Joe show continues, John Trabacchino asks. Okay, so here's the deal with regards to the Joe and Joe show. Joe is not the most tech savvy guy in the world, but he's learning. Okay, he actually has his iPhone with him now and he keeps it turned on. So that's a big step forward. So I'm going to show him how to use the software, and I could certainly get him Skyped on. So we're going to try and continue it. Just a matter of getting some sort of regular schedule underway. But I am going to try to continue. Donna Lavasseur about Carol Silva. She's a local anchor here on Long Island. Yes, I do understand that she does have. She's out right now with some sort of medical issues, and I'm going to reach out to her and find out what's happening. But all the best to her. She and I worked together back in News 12 Days in the late 80s to the mid 1990s. It was a wonderful experience for me. She's a great anchor and a great lady, and I do wish her well with regards to what she is dealing with. And prayers out to her. So just keep her in your thoughts, please. She did reveal that. Okay, let me just Don. I'm just gonna get. I'll get in touch with her and see what's going on. Let's see. You're waiting for your. Hope you're not hoping for another heavy Thanksgiving snowstorm on Thanksgiving, John Trabacchino. That was in Thanksgiving of 2014. And the winter of 2014-15 was not too shabby for cold weather and snow lovers. So we'll see. We got so much time. We're going to have so much fun coming up this winter with me not having to drive 3 hours a day anymore, and certainly not having to drive in snowstorms, and timing my live streams around my travel and my work schedule. It's all going to be right here, and that's good. Anthony Orr, I don't know if it's right, but if the GFS is correct with the Madden-Julian oscillation tropical forcing phases, the ridge will be correct in the east on a very transient basis. It's certainly possible. I would just be really careful with that Madden-Julian oscillation, because lately that indicator has not really worked very well. It's been going into predicting that it's been going into certain phases. The Madden-Julian oscillation, for those of you who don't know, is it's basically a wind pattern in the West Pacific and out into the Indian Ocean. It's more west of more into the Indian Ocean side, and there are certain patterns and oscillations with regards to the winds there that match up to the kind of weather we have here in the East. It particularly is useful during the winter time when it gets into certain phases that are favorable for cold and snow here. But I would just point out that just as one example, I could recall back last February where everybody was jumping up and down because the Madden-Julian oscillation was going into a phase 8, 1, and 2, which are phases that are favorable for cold and snow here in the eastern part of the U.S. And it never really happened. It just kind of got stuck and never got into those particularly favorable phases, even though the longer range guidance was favorable for that. So Reaver, the Santa Ana wind. All right. So what happens in with the Santa Ana wind? Let me. We'll do a quick little tutorial on that. Let's see. Don't think I'm able to go back far enough. Let me just go back, see how far back on the GFS we can go. Let's go back to Tuesday. Because at least I can pull up the surface map with that. All right, so this will help. And we'll put the precip on, the actual precip, so you can see the snow. Okay, so this was our Great Plains, this was our plains snowstorm. So what happens is, in a situation like this, you get a very deep low that builds out in the plains. And what happens out in the west when that's going on, you'll notice that the gradient here is exceptionally tight throughout Colorado and then down into California, and here up in here as well. You have low pressure that is there's kind of a semi-permanent feature here in the summer months and into the early fall of what we call a thermal low that is down in Southern California. Sometimes it's back over to Arizona, but when it shifts westward like this, you have the winds coming northeast and then moving into California. Very, very strong, but this air is exceptionally dry. I mean, it's really just super dry air that's there. And of course, you've got these very strong winds. You're coming off the summer months and the first part of the fall where things are very, very dry to begin with. And if you look at the dew points down in California, particularly in Southern California, you're talking about dew points that are down in the teens in many areas, and not too far, right along the immediate coast, the dew points are higher, but the dew points are exceptionally low here. So you're talking about really dry ground, really dry tinder, this northeast wind that at times can be howling. See how if the model picks it up on the 10-meter winds, and it actually does to some extent. You can see the patches here into Southern California of winds sustained at 30 miles an hour. Those are the sustained winds. You wind up with much higher winds in gusts, of course, and all it takes then is a spark of some kind with all that dry tinder, and it goes up in flames. And the Santa Ana, under certain conditions, is a wind because it's so bone dry and you get the subsidence down the mountains that if the winds are from the east or northeast all the way down to the coast, that's when you get those really, really hot temperatures in the areas like LA and down into San Diego where it goes up to 100 degrees. I don't think it quite did that this time around, but for the inland spots, it certainly did. You certainly had the ingredients there for wildfires. It does. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't even have the window up. Let me just show you that again. I apologize for that. So this was the 10-meter wind, and this was for Wednesday night into Thursday. And when you look at the dew points, as I showed you here, look, I mean, these are really dry dew points. Look at those dew points in parts of Nevada down to the single digit dew points here. I mean, this is just absolutely bone dry air in the wake of that big storm out in the plains. And the gradient, as I was showing you, look how tight that gradient gets here in parts of Southern California. So uh, it was all the ingredients were there. And if you watch how it evolved, okay, there's nothing special here happening. Your thermal low is right in here, which is about where it's supposed to be. And then as we move along, the thermal low actually winds up shifting eastward. I'm sorry, westward. So it goes right to about here. Okay, so you got this long fetch of northeasterly winds, just absolutely super drying the air as they head into California. And you see how tight that gradient gets. That got at this time, especially east of the mountains. There, the gradient got especially tight. So everything was there. The ingredients were certainly there with regards to the Santa Ana setting up and causing a very, very big problem. We should mention, by the way, that the maps are courtesy of tropicaltidbits.com, which I think should be your go-to site when it comes to looking at weather models. It is it's loaded with weather models. Cal Allison, I'm sorry, I got the maps up. I did realize my mistake. Oh, I get so rushed sometimes, and when I'm not used to pushing these buttons the way I'm supposed to do it on the mouse and everything else, that I make these little boo-boos. So there you have it. Let's just see if NHC has done anything on their new advisory. I'm not expecting any surprises. 11 o'clock, Melissa is beginning to pull away. Southeast at 6. 37.7 at 6 and 68.8 west. So it never really again made it to 70. Top winds are down to 50 miles an hour, and the lowest pressure estimate is 997 millibars. And on their headline, they say Melissa gradually pulling away from the U.S. mid-Atlantic and North New England coast. Coastal flooding still expected in some areas around on Saturday around the times of high tide. And I think that's a very fair description of what is going on, what is going to be going on for tomorrow. John Mayano, thanks for being here tonight. Good evening to you. I know it's late. David Schwartz, you just joined on in time for the end, so you're going to have to go back to the beginning on the replay. All right, folks. Oh yes, Donna Levasseur, decreasing winds, and you hope you hope my hair is a mess all the time. Bad hair weather. By all means, it's bad hair weather. All right, folks, let me just remind you, as I like to do going forward, and this is going to become especially valuable during the wintertime for those of you who are weather geeky. You might want to consider jumping onto my weather platform on Patreon. It's just $2 a month, and you get lots of extra weather, including extra weather videos, and you can message me anytime. Try to be a little more locally focused, but locally focused for many different areas. So if you have specific questions or needs for your particular area, this might be the platform for you, particularly if snow removal is your business. I have some tiers. I have special tiers for those of you who need more one-on-one on a regular basis. I put the link up on the chat board for those of you who are interested. Again, it's just $2 a month with higher tiers for those of you who need who need extra attention. And don't forget, please download the updated version of my weather app on Google Play or on the App Store. It is, we made some changes so that you don't have to put your location in manually every time. It should default to your location with regards to current conditions and your local forecasts. And also for those of you on Long Island, there's a separate Long Island tab now for when I do Long Island weather updates, which once I'm done with my TV stuff, those forecasts for Long Island will be updated on a daily basis. I do put in a general one in there every day that covers most of my area, but I do like to get specific for Long Island, which is my home, where my home base is. So once we get back into the middle of November, when I'm on here full time, there should be time for me to do one every single day. Danny Nankumar, thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate it. Very important to just stay logical and drama free on this channel, which is what we try to do. And a happy Thanksgiving to all our Canadian friends. Thanks for reminding me, John Trabacchino. Kane is on tonight. Yeah, these late notifications that go out from YouTube, that's unfortunately not under my control. However, just make sure that if you have YouTube on your phone, make sure that the notifications are turned on and that you don't log off of it. Okay, that's a big deal. If you log off of YouTube, then you're not going to get your notifications on time. So make sure you're logged on. That you're logged on online, that you're logged on your phone, and that your phone notifications are turned on for YouTube, and you should get notifications most of the time. One of the things that they explained with regards to notifications on YouTube is that the notifications are also going to be affected by other people that are doing live streams and videos. So if they have a ton of people doing videos and live streams at the same time with a ton of notifications going out, their systems can't always handle the volume. So you do wind up getting them late. If you're a Patreon member, what I do is I always put a post up on Patreon a couple of hours. Tonight it wasn't because of the late nature of the live stream, but I do put up a post on Patreon usually about 2 hours before the live stream hits, so that you'll know that it's coming on at a certain time, and the chat board opens up when you get that notification. So you're able to jump onto the chat board. It's open. If I schedule the live stream 2 hours before, the chat board's going to be open 2 hours before. And I know a number of you do jump on early and have conversations amongst yourselves. Or if I'm able to, I jump into the chat from time to time on the pre-show. So if you have all those things working, you won't miss these live streams. Okay, so tomorrow is Saturday. I'm going to try and do something. I will do Weather in 5. I'll see about a live stream tomorrow night if I do have time. I'm still running back and forth and taking care of a few things, but if the weather is overly calm looking, I may take one more break day and then definitely do one on Sunday, one way or the other. So thanks very much for being here on a Friday night. Really appreciate it. And again, sorry for the late live stream, but it couldn't be helped. And we'll see you tomorrow.